The Boeing 737 shuddered violently as it hit another pocket of rough air. Maya Shun steadied herself against the galley counter, her practiced smile never wavering despite the coffee that had just splashed across her pristine blue uniform. 40,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, with 237 passengers depending on her professionalism, she couldn't afford to show even a flicker of concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some moderate turbulence," she announced over the intercom, her voice calm and reassuring. "Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." But this wasn't moderate turbulence. Maya had been flying for 8 years with Pacific Airways, and she'd never felt anything like the violent jerking that was making the aircraft buckets and overhead bins creak ominously. Through the small galley window, she could see storm clouds that hadn't been in the weather report, their dark masses swirling with an almost supernatural fury. Her colleague, James, stumbled past her, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "The pilots aren't responding to the call button," he whispered urgently. "I've been pressing it for 5 minutes." Maya's blood ran cold. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Kim were seasoned professionals with over 40 years of combined flying experience between them. They would never ignore a call from the cabin crew, especially during turbulence this severe. "Keep the passengers calm," she instructed James, already moving toward the cockpit. "I'm going to check on them." She knocked firmly on the reinforced door. "Captain Rodriguez?" "Captain, we need to speak with you about the turbulence." Silence. The plane lurched again, this time so violently that several passengers screamed. Maya pressed her ear to the door and heard something that made her heart stop. The sound of labored, irregular breathing, followed by what sounded like someone collapsing. Her training kicked in immediately. She grabbed the emergency phone and dialed the cockpit extension. It rang and rang, but no one answered. Through the door, she could hear the autopilot warning chime, a sound that meant the aircraft was no longer under human control. "James," she called out, her voice sharper now. "I need you here now." The senior flight attendant rushed over, taking one look at Maya's pale face and understanding immediately. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "I think they're incapacitated." The words felt surreal coming out of her mouth. In all her years of emergency training, this scenario had been covered only briefly. The assumption was always that at least one pilot would remain conscious and capable. The plane suddenly dropped what felt like 1,000 feet. Passengers shrieked as their belongings flew through the cabin. The oxygen masks deployed with a collective gasp of released air, yellow cups dangling like grotesque party decorations. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and put on your oxygen masks," James announced over the PA system, but Maya could hear the barely controlled panic in his voice. She stared at the cockpit door, her mind racing through possibilities. Food poisoning? Heart attacks? Some kind of toxic exposure? It didn't matter now. What mattered was that 237 people were trapped in a metal tube 7 miles above the ocean, and the only people who knew how to land it were unconscious behind a locked door she couldn't open. Maya took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. She picked up the intercom handset with trembling fingers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant speaking. We are experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. I need anyone with pilot training or aviation experience to please identify themselves immediately by pressing your call button. This is not a drill." The cabin fell into stunned silence, broken only by the sound of the engines and the whistle of wind against the fuselage. Maya counted 5 call buttons lighting up across the cabin, their soft chime somehow both hopeful and terrifying. As she moved down the aisle to interview the potential pilots, Maya caught her reflection in one of the passenger windows. She looked exactly like what she was, a 29-year-old flight attendant with a bachelor's degree in hospitality management and a weakness for romantic comedies. She was just Maya Chun from Sacramento, who had joined the airline because she loved to travel and meet people. But right now, she was the only thing standing between 237 souls and disaster. And she had absolutely no idea how to fly a plane. Maya's hands shook as she approached the first passenger who had responded to her call. Seat 12A, Dr. Robert Harrison, a distinguished man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and a Rolex that caught the cabin lights. I'm a physician, not a pilot, Dr. Harrison said before she could speak, his voice tight with understanding of their situation. But I did some flight training in the Air Force 30 years ago. Cessnas mostly, nothing like this. Any experience is better than none, Maya replied, moving quickly to the next passenger. Seat 23C, Marcus Webb, a lanky man with nervous eyes and paint-stained fingers. I'm a flight instructor, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I teach in small aircraft single-engine Pipers, some twin-engine Beechcraft. I've never even been inside a commercial airliner cockpit. Maya felt a flicker of hope. But you understand the principles? Navigation, landing procedures? The basics, yes, but... Marcus gestured helplessly at the complex aircraft around them. This is like asking someone who drives a bicycle to pilot a space shuttle. The plane lurched again, and Maya had to grab the seat back to steady herself. Through the windows, she could see they were descending, though whether intentionally or not, she couldn't tell. The autopilot was still engaged, but for how long? She quickly interviewed the remaining 3 passengers. 2 were private pilots, with minimal experience, and 1 was a retired air traffic controller who understood communications, but had never actually flown anything larger than a recreational aircraft. All right, Maya said, her mind racing through her limited options. Marcus, I need you to come with me. Dr. Harrison, please stay ready as backup. She turned to the air traffic controller, a weathered man named Frank Rodriguez. Can you help us with radio communications if we need them? Absolutely, Frank nodded, his steady demeanor a small comfort. Maya led Marcus toward the front of the plane, where James was trying to keep the increasingly panicked passengers calm. Several people were crying openly now, and she could see. Others frantically texting on their phones, probably sending what they thought might be final messages to loved ones. James, I need you to try everything you can think of to get into that cockpit, she instructed. Emergency codes, maintenance, overrides, anything. Maya, James said quietly, even if we get in, what if they're dead? The thought had occurred to her, but she pushed it away. Then we figure it out from there. But we have to assume they're alive and can be helped. She turned to Marcus, who was staring at the cockpit door with the expression of a man about to walk the plank. I need you to tell me everything you know about commercial aircraft emergency procedures. Assume I know nothing. Jesus, Marcus ran his hands through his hair. Okay, first thing, we need to know what's wrong with the pilots. Could be hypoxia, carbon monoxide poisoning, food poisoning, medical emergency. If it's environmental, we might be affected too. Maya nodded, filing away the information. What about the plane itself? Can it fly without the pilots? The autopilot can maintain course and altitude, but it can't think. It can't adapt to changing conditions or handle emergencies. And eventually, we'll need to land. Marcus's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Maya, even if we get into the cockpit, even if the pilots are alive and can talk us through it, the chances of successfully landing a plane this size, with no experience... What are the chances if we do nothing? Maya asked sharply. Marcus fell silent, understanding her point perfectly. James suddenly called out from the cockpit door. I think I heard something. Maya, get over here. Maya rushed over and pressed her ear to the door. She could definitely hear movement inside, not the lay. Random sounds of unconscious bodies shifting, but purposeful motion. Someone was awake there, "Captain Rodriguez," she called out. "Captain, can you hear me? This is Maya from the cabin crew." A weak voice came through the door, barely audible over the engine noise. "Maya, something's wrong. Can't think. Straight. Dave's unconscious. I think we've been poisoned." Maya's blood ran cold. Poisoned. That meant this wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone on this plane had intentionally incapacitated the pilots. She looked back at the cabin full of passengers, any one of whom could be responsible. Then she looked at Marcus, whose face had gone pale as he realized the implications. "Captain, we're going to get you help," Maya called through the door. "Just hold on. Can you unlock the door?" "Can't reach. Controls are—" His voice faded into unintelligible mumbling. Maya turned to James. "Get Dr. Harrison up here immediately. And find out if we have any medical supplies that might help with poisoning." She grabbed Marcus's arm. "How long can the autopilot keep us in the air?" "Depends on fuel and weather conditions," Marcus replied, his voice shaky. "Maybe 3 hours? 4 at most before we have to land somewhere." Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She had to get into that cockpit, save the pilots, identify and stop whoever had poisoned them, and somehow get this plane safely on the ground. And she had. Less than 4 hours to do it. What do you think will happen next? Share your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. Dr. Harrison arrived at the cockpit with the emergency medical kit, his face grim. "If it's poisoning, we need to know what kind," he said without preamble. "Some toxins have antidotes, others don't. Time is critical." Maya nodded, then called through the door again. "Captain Rodriguez, can you tell us what you ate or drank in the last few hours? Anything unusual?" The response came in broken fragments. "Coffee ... brought coffee ... new flight attendant. Didn't recognize ... double quotes." His voice trailed off into silence. "New flight attendant?" Maya looked at James sharply. "We don't have any new crew members on this flight." James's face went white. "The catering staff. Someone could have—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening. "Maya, I saw someone in a crew uniform earlier, near the galley. I thought it was the new hire from headquarters, but I was busy with passengers and didn't really look." "What did they look like?" Maya demanded. "Average height, dark hair." "I'm sorry, I barely glanced." "Maya, if someone unauthorized is on this plane with crew access..." The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. Someone had infiltrated their crew, poisoned the pilots, and was now somewhere among the 237 passengers. She looked back at the cabin, studying faces with new intensity. Any one of these frightened, crying, praying people could be a terrorist. "We need to get into that cockpit now," she decided. "James, is there any way to override the door lock?" "There's an emergency access code, but it's different for every aircraft and only the pilots know it. Sometimes maintenance has it, but—" "Wait," Marcus interrupted. "Maya, look at the doorframe. See that small panel? There should be a manual release for extreme emergencies. It requires tools we probably don't have, but—" Dr. Harrison was already examining the panel. "This looks like a standard hex head screw. We need an Allen wrench, maybe 1/4 inch." Maya's mind raced. "James, check the galley equipment. Look for anything that might work. I'll check the overhead compartments for passenger tools." As they scattered to search, Maya heard Captain Rodriguez's voice again, stronger this time. "Maya ... listen, carefully. The person who brought the coffee ... they had a slight accent. European maybe, and ... and they seemed to know exactly where." Everything was too familiar. Maya's blood chilled. A professional. This wasn't some random terrorist attack. This was someone with specific knowledge of airline operations. Found something. James called out, holding up a small toolkit from the emergency equipment compartment. Maintenance kit for minor repairs. Doctor. Harrison took the Allen wrench and began working on the panel. This is going to take a few minutes. The screws are tight. While he worked, Maya made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we are working to resolve the situation in the cockpit. For your safety, I need everyone to remain in their seats. Do not get up for any reason unless it's a medical emergency. She kept her voice calm and professional, but inside she was screaming. Somewhere in this cabin was someone who wanted this plane to crash, and she had no way to identify them. They could be planning another attack right now. Maya, Marcus whispered urgently, we need to talk about what happens when we get into the cockpit. Even if the captain can talk us through basic procedures, landing this plane is going to require more skill than I have. The approach speeds alone are triple what I'm used to, and if the weather's bad at our destination, we'll figure it out, Maya said firmly, but she could hear the desperation in her own voice. Got it, Dr. Harrison announced as the panel came free. Behind it was a manual release lever. He pulled it, and they heard the satisfying click of the door lock disengaging. Maya took a deep breath and pushed open the cockpit door. The sight that greeted her was a nightmare. Captain Rodriguez was slumped in his seat, conscious but barely responsive, sweat beading on his forehead. First Officer Kim was completely unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. The instrument panel blazed with warning lights and, through the windscreen, Maya could see the storm clouds they were flying through were getting darker and more turbulent. Dr. Harrison immediately moved to check both pilots' vital signs. Pulse is rapid but weak for both of them. Pupils are dilated. This looks like some kind of neurotoxin, possibly something that affects the nervous system. Can you treat it? Maya asked, helping him examine First Officer Kim. Without knowing the specific poison, I can try supportive care, but he shook his head grimly. Maya, the captain might regain some function with treatment, but it's going to take time we don't have. And the first officer, he's in bad shape. Maya stared at the bewildering array of instruments and controls. Nothing looked familiar except the most basic elements, the steering yoke, the throttles, some of the gauges. Everything else might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. Marcus, get in here, she called out. We need to figure this out now. Marcus squeezed into the cockpit and immediately went pale. Oh God, Maya, I don't know if I can do this. The approach procedures alone require precision I don't have. And look at those weather conditions, we're flying into a storm system. Captain Rodriguez stirred slightly. A UTO autopilot engaged, but fuel running low. Need to divert to the nearest airport. Which airport? Maya asked urgently. Seattle. Maybe Portland. Check the navigation display. Marcus leaned over the controls, his hands shaking. I can read basic instruments, but this navigation system is completely different from anything I've trained on. Maya, we need air traffic control to help guide us. Frank. Maya called out to the retired air traffic controller. We need you up here. As Frank squeezed into the already crowded cockpit, Maya heard a commotion from the cabin behind them. James's voice over the intercom was tight with stress. Maya, we have a situation out here. Someone's trying to get into the overhead compartments against your instructions, and they're not responding to requests to sit down. Maya's heart pounded. Was this their saboteur making another move? I have to handle this, she told the others. Marcus, start learning everything you can about these controls. Frank, get on the radio and declare an emergency. Tell them we have incapacitated pilots and need immediate guidance for an emergency landing. Maya, Dr. Harrison called as she turned to leave. The captain's condition is stabilizing slightly. He might be able to give us more guidance in a little while. But the first officer, he shook his head. Maya nodded grimly and headed back into the cabin, where she could see a commotion near the middle of the aircraft. A passenger in seat 34B, Woman with short dark hair and a nervous expression was standing in the aisle despite multiple requests from James to sit down. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat immediately," Maya said firmly. Approaching the woman looked up, and Maya saw something in her eyes that made her blood run cold. It wasn't fear or confusion. It was a calculation. "I'm sorry," the woman said with a slight accent that Maya now recognized. "I was just looking for my medication. This situation has me very anxious." European accent. Dark hair. Too familiar with airline procedures. Maya realized she was looking directly at the person who had poisoned her pilots. Maya forced herself to remain calm, her training kicking in even as her mind screamed danger. The woman in front of her was the enemy, but they were trapped together at 40,000 feet with no backup and no weapons. "Of course," Maya said smoothly. "Let me help you find your medication. What does it look like?" The woman Maya still didn't know her name smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Small white pills for anxiety. You understand how stressful this situation is." "Absolutely." Maya moved closer, ostensibly to help search the overhead compartment, but really to study the woman more carefully. Mid-30s, athletic build, wearing nondescript jeans and a sweater that could easily conceal weapons. Her hands were steady despite her claims of anxiety, and her posture suggested someone comfortable with physical confrontation. "I don't see any medication up here," Maya said, maintaining her helpful flight attendant persona. "Are you sure you put it in the overhead? Sometimes passengers accidentally leave items in the seat pocket." As the woman bent to check her seat, Maya caught James's eye and gave him a subtle hand signal they'd learned in security training. "Potential threat. Stay alert." James nodded almost imperceptibly and began moving closer, pretending to check on other passengers. "You know," Maya said conversationally, "it's interesting that you mention anxiety medication. I would have thought of someone with your experience would be used in stressful situations." The woman straightened slowly, her false smile fading. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The coffee you delivered to the cockpit earlier. That was very thoughtful of you to help the crew. Not many passengers know where the pilot's refreshments are prepared." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Other passengers were starting to notice the tension, their conversations dying away as they sensed something was wrong. "I think you should sit down now," Maya said, her voice still professional but with an edge of steel. "I think," the woman replied, her accent becoming more pronounced, "that you should worry about your dying pilots instead of harassing passengers." Maya felt anger flare in her chest. "What did you give them?" "Nothing fatal," the woman said with a shrug. "Yet, but without the proper treatment, they'll slip into comas within the next 2 hours. And since you don't know what poison was used, She smiled coldly. "Well, let's just say your chances of landing safely are getting smaller by the minute." "What do you want?" Maya demanded. "Originally? For this plane to crash over the Pacific, a tragic accident. But you've been more resourceful than expected." The woman's eyes flicked toward the cockpit. "Now I suppose I want to see how long you can keep everyone alive." Maya realized with horror that this wasn't just terrorism, it was sport. This woman was enjoying watching them struggle. James had moved into position behind the woman, and Maya could see other passengers starting to understand that something was very wrong. Dr. Harrison appeared at the cockpit door, having heard the commotion. "You're going to tell me what poison you used," Maya said firmly, "and then you're going to help us save this plane." The woman laughed. "Or what? You'll arrest me? We're all going to die anyway when your little flight instructor friend tries to land this aircraft. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to bring down a 737 safely, even with full training?" "Then help us," Maya snapped. "If we crash, you die too." "I never planned to survive this flight," the woman replied matter-of-factly. But I didn't expect to have such interesting company for my final hours. Maya felt a chill of realization. They weren't dealing with a terrorist who wanted to escape. They were dealing with a suicide bomber who had simply chosen poison instead of explosives. Behind the woman, James tensed, ready to move. But Maya held up a subtle hand to stop him. In the confined space of an aircraft, a physical struggle could be catastrophic, especially if the woman had other weapons. "What's your name?" Maya asked. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." The woman studied Maya's face for a long moment. "Elena Kovač." "And you're Maya Chen, 8 years with Pacific Airways. Excellent safety record, originally from Sacramento." Maya's blood ran cold. This woman had done research on the crew. This attack was specifically targeted. Why this flight? Why us? Pacific Airways fired my brother last year. Blamed him for a maintenance error that killed 37 people. He killed himself rather than face prison. Elena's voice was flat, emotionless, so I thought I'd return the favor. "Your brother's mistake cost lives," Maya said carefully. "But these passengers are innocent." "Were the passengers on flight?" 447 guilty of anything. "The flight my brother supposedly caused to crash?" Elena's composure finally cracked slightly. "They were just people trying to get home, and Pacific Airways destroyed my family to avoid liability." Maya felt a flicker of understanding, even sympathy, but she pushed it away. Whatever injustice Elena felt she'd suffered, this wasn't the answer. "Killing innocent people won't bring your brother back," Maya said. "No," Elena agreed. "But it will make Pacific Airways pay." Dr. Harrison stepped forward slightly. "Elena, I'm a physician. Whatever you gave the pilots, I might be able to help them if you tell me what it was. You don't have to let this end in tragedy." Elena looked at him with genuine curiosity. "You would try to save them? Even knowing they work for the company that destroyed my family?" "I took an oath to do no harm," Dr. Harrison replied simply. "Those men have families too." For a moment, Maya thought she saw doubt flicker across Elena's face, but then the woman's expression hardened again. "Too late for second thoughts, doctor. The poison I used has no antidote. Your pilots will be unconscious within the hour, and then you'll have to choose between attempting an impossible landing or accepting the inevitable." Maya felt despair clawing at her chest, but she pushed it down. She couldn't give up. 237 lives depended on her finding a solution. "James," she said quietly, "escort Ms. Kovač to a seat and make sure she stays there. Use restraints if necessary." "Maya," Elena said as James moved to take her arm, "you should know the poison isn't the only surprise I prepared for this flight." Maya's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Elena smiled that cold smile again. "Let's just say you should be very careful about your landing approach. Some airports are safer than others." As James led Elena away, Maya realized their nightmare was far from over. Not only did they have to land a plane with an amateur pilot, but Elena had somehow sabotaged their options even further. She looked toward the cockpit, where Marcus was frantically trying to learn systems he'd never seen before, and wondered if any of them would live to see the ground. Maya rushed back to the cockpit, where she found Marcus hunched over the instrument panel with Frank guiding him through the radio communications. Captain Rodriguez was slightly more alert, though still clearly struggling with the effects of the poison. "Maya," Frank called out, "I've got air traffic control on the line. They're clearing us for emergency landing in Seattle, but there's a problem. The storm system is moving in that direction. Visibility is dropping fast. How long until we have to land?" Maya asked. Marcus looked up from the controls, his face pale with stress. "Fuel gauge shows about 90 minutes remaining." "But Maya," Elena was right about one thing, even under perfect conditions. "The odds of me successfully landing this aircraft are ... double quotes." He shook his head. "I keep thinking about all the things that can go wrong." Approach speed, flap settings, runway alignment, braking systems. Double quotes. Captain Rodriguez stirred in his seat. Maya. Listen. Elena. She said something about airports. What did she mean? Maya's stomach dropped as she remembered Elena's parting words. She said some airports are safer than others. That we should be careful about our landing approach. Seattle, Captain Rodriguez mumbled, fighting to focus. If she researched this flight. She might know. Seattle has construction. Runway 16 left is closed for repairs. Only one long runway is available, and with this storm. Frank was already on the radio. Seattle Tower, this is Pacific 847. Be advised we have additional complications. Possible sabotage concerns regarding runway conditions. Request status. On all available runways. The response crackled through the speakers. Pacific 847. Seattle Tower. Runway 16 left is indeed closed for construction. Runway 16 right is available but shortened due to equipment storage. We're also showing wind shear warnings due to the storm system. You might want to consider alternate airports. Alternatives? Maya asked Frank. Portland is possible, but the weather's just as bad there. Spokane is clear, but it's further. We might not have enough fuel. Frank's voice was grim. And without knowing what other surprises Elena might have arranged. Dr. Harrison looked up from checking First Officer Kim. Captain Rodriguez is stable for now, but his cognitive function is definitely impaired. The first officer is still unconscious, and his breathing is getting shallower. Maya, I hate to say this, but we need to consider that we might be on our own for the landing. Maya felt the weight of command crushing down on her. In her 8 years as a flight attendant, she'd dealt with medical emergencies, unruly passengers, even severe turbulence. But nothing had prepared her for this, being responsible for the lives of everyone on board while trying to outwit a terrorist and land a plane with a flight instructor who was clearly terrified. Marcus, she said, tell me honestly, what are our real chances? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the controls. Maya, I've been flying for 15 years, but always small aircraft. Single engine, simple systems. This. He gestured at the bewildering array of instruments. It's like asking someone who drives a car to pilot a submarine. The principles are similar, but the complexity is overwhelming. But it's possible. Maybe, if everything goes perfectly. If the weather clears. If the runway conditions are good. If I don't make any critical errors. He met her eyes. But Maya. The statistical likelihood of success for an untrained pilot landing a commercial aircraft is less than 5%. Maya absorbed this information, then made a decision. Then we need to improve those odds. Captain Rodriguez, I need you to stay alert and guide Marcus through every step. Dr. Harrison, do whatever you can to keep both pilots stable. Frank, work with air traffic control to find us the safest possible approach. What about Elena? James asked from the cockpit doorway. She's secured in her seat, but she keeps smiling like she knows something we don't. We'll deal with whatever else she's planned when we have to, Maya replied. Right now, we focus on getting this plane down safely. She looked around at the faces of her makeshift crew. Marcus, pale and sweating, as he tried to absorb decades of pilot training in minutes. Dr. Harrison, methodically checking the pilot's conditions. Frank, maintaining calm professional communication with air traffic control. James, managing an increasingly frightened cabin full of passengers. Maya, Captain Rodriguez called weakly, there's something else. Elena, when she brought the coffee, she was asking questions about our approach procedures. Specific questions about emergency protocols. Maya's heart sank. What kind of questions? About what happens if we lose radio contact. About automated landing systems. About ... He struggled to remember through the fog of poison. About what airports have emergency phone capabilities. The Implications hit Maya like a physical blow. Elena hadn't just poisoned the pilots, she'd gathered intelligence about their emergency procedures. She knew exactly what their options would be, and had somehow planned for them. "Frank, get back on the radio. I want to know the current status of every piece of emergency equipment at every airport within our fuel range. And ask them to double-check for any unusual activity, any unauthorized personnel, anything that seems out of place." As Frank made the calls, Maya heard commotion from the cabin again. Through the cockpit door, she could see passengers pointing out the windows. The storm they were flying through was getting worse, and daylight was fading fast. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced over the intercom, "we are working with air traffic control to get us safely on the ground. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the crew." But even as she spoke the words, Maya wondered if she was lying. How could she promise safety when they were trapped in a flying tomb with a terrorist who seemed to have anticipated their every move? Marcus suddenly looked up from the controls, his eyes wide with realization. "Maya, I just thought of something. Elena said she researched this flight, right? What if she didn't just research the crew and the airports? What if she researched the passengers too?" Maya felt ice form in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "What if she specifically chose this flight because of who's on board? What if there's something about our passenger manifest that makes this attack even more devastating than just a random plane crash?" Maya stared at him, then at the cabin full of frightened people behind them. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she hadn't considered the bigger picture. Who were these passengers? Why this specific flight? "James," she called out, "bring me the passenger manifest, all of it." As James hurried to retrieve the documents, Maya realized that Elena's game was far more complex than simple revenge. And they were still missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. With less than an hour of fuel remaining and a storm system blocking their path to safety, Maya began to understand that landing the plane might be the least of their problems. The tension is building. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which character you're rooting for. Your support helps me create more incredible stories like this one. James returned with the passenger manifest, and Maya spread the documents across the small chart table in the cockpit. Marcus continued his crash course in 737 systems with Captain Rodriguez's weak but persistent guidance, while Frank coordinated with air traffic control. "Look for patterns," Maya instructed James. "Government officials, celebrities, business leaders, anyone who might make this flight a high-value target." As they scanned the list, Maya noticed several concerning entries. Senator Patricia Williams was in first class, traveling to Seattle for climate change hearings. Dr. Michael Chun, no relation, despite the shared surname, was the lead researcher on a classified Defense Department project. Rebecca Martinez was the chief financial officer of a major pharmaceutical company. "Maya," James whispered, "look at seat 23F, David Kovač." Maya's blood went cold. Kovač. Same last name as Elena. But she said her brother was dead. Maya studied the manifest more carefully. David Kovač, age 28, traveling alone to Seattle. According to the emergency contact information, his sister was listed as Elena Kovač. She lied, Maya realized. Her brother isn't dead, he's on this plane. The pieces began falling into place. This wasn't a suicide mission of revenge. It was something far more complex and elaborate plan to what? Fake David's death? Make it look like he died in the crash Elena was planning to cause? Where is seat 23F? Maya asked urgently. James checked the cabin chart. Middle section, aisle seat. I can see it from here. He peered through the cockpit door. There's a young man there, dark hair. Looks nervous but not panicked like everyone else. Maya felt anger and hope warring in her chest. If David Kovač was working with his sister, they had a terrorist among the passengers. But if he wasn't, if Elena had lied to him too, then maybe they had leverage. I need to talk to him, Maya decided. But carefully. We don't know if he's complicit or another victim. Captain Rodriguez spoke up weakly. Maya, if Elena planned this to fake her brother's death, then she might have arranged for evidence to survive the crash. Something that would prove Pacific Airways was at fault. The implications were staggering. Elena wasn't just seeking revenge, she was planning an elaborate frame job that would destroy the airline's reputation, while allowing her brother to disappear with a new identity. Marcus, how are we doing on the landing approach? Maya asked. Getting there, Marcus replied, sweat beading on his forehead. Captain Rodriguez has been walking me through the basic procedures, but Maya, even if I get the approach right, the weather conditions are getting worse. Seattle Tower is reporting wind gusts up to 40 knots and visibility down to less than a mile. Alternatives? Frank looked up from the radio. Portland is completely soaked in zero visibility. Spokane is still clear, but we're at the edge of our fuel range if we have to make a go-around attempt. He shook his head. Then we better get it right the first time, Maya said grimly. James, I need you to approach David Kovač very carefully. Don't let on that we know his connection to Elena. Just talk to him like any other nervous passenger. See if you can get a read on whether he's involved or if he's as much a victim as everyone else. James nodded and headed back into the cabin. Maya watched through the cockpit door as he approached seat 23F, maintaining his professional demeanor. Despite the crisis, Dr. Harrison looked up from checking Captain Rodriguez's pulse. His condition is deteriorating again. Whatever Elena used, it's designed to have waves of effect. He might become completely unconscious soon. How long do we have? Maya asked. Maybe 20 minutes of useful guidance. After that, Dr. Harrison shrugged helplessly. Maya felt panic clawing at her throat. 20 minutes to learn how to land a commercial aircraft in a storm. It was impossible. Maya, Marcus called out, his voice tight with stress. I'm getting warnings on the fuel system. We're burning more than normal, probably because of the turbulence and altitude changes from the storm. We need to commit to an airport in the next 10 minutes, or we won't have enough fuel for a second approach anywhere. Through the cockpit windows, Maya could see the storm clouds getting darker and more turbulent. Lightning flashed in the distance, and the plane continued to shake with increasing violence. Seattle Tower is asking for our intentions, Frank reported. They need to clear other traffic if we're coming in for emergency landing. Before Maya could respond, James's voice came over the intercom, tight with barely controlled alarm. Maya, I need you in the cabin, now. Maya looked at Marcus, who was pale but focused on the instruments. Keep learning everything you can. I'll be right back. She hurried into the cabin and found James standing near seat 23F, where a young man with dark hair and scared eyes was looking up at them both. Maya, James said quietly, meet David Kovač. He has something to tell you. David looked around nervously at the other passengers, then spoke in a whisper. My sister Elena, she's on this plane, isn't she? And something's gone wrong with her plan. Maya felt her heart racing. What plan? She told me we were just going to scare Pacific Airways, make them pay for what they did to our family. She said no one would get hurt, that the pilots would just get sick enough to cause an emergency landing, and then we'd have evidence of safety failures. David's voice was shaking. But I've been watching the crew, and this isn't just an emergency landing, is it? This is life or death. Your sister poisoned both pilots, Maya said bluntly. They're barely conscious, and we have an amateur trying to learn how to land this plane in a storm with less than an hour of fuel remaining. David went white. She said ... She promised no one would die. She said it was just about getting justice for our brother Marco. Your brother is dead? Maya asked, confused. Killed himself last year after Pacific. Airways blamed him for the maintenance failure on Flight 447. Elena's been obsessed with revenge ever since. David looked around the cabin at the frightened passengers, but this wasn't supposed to happen. She said the pilots would recover quickly, that there would just be some scary moments, and then a safe emergency landing. Maya realized Elena had lied to her brother just as she'd lied to everyone else. David was a pawn, not a willing participant. "David, I need you to tell me everything Elena planned. Every detail. She researched this flight for months. She knew about the senator, the defense researcher, the pharmaceutical executive. She said if anything went wrong with a plane carrying these people, it would be major news. Maximum pressure on Pacific Airways." David was speaking faster now, his fear evident. But she also said she had backup plans. Things that would ensure the crash investigation would blame the airline, not her. Maya's blood went cold. "What kind of backup plans?" "I don't know exactly. Something about evidence that would survive the crash. Documents, recordings maybe." She was very secretive about that part. David grabbed Maya's arm. "But there's something else. She gave me something to keep safe during the flight. She said it was insurance." He reached into his carry-on bag and pulled out a small metal cylinder about the size of a pill bottle. "She said if anything happened to her, I should make sure this survived the flight." "But Maya, if people are really going to die..." Maya took the cylinder, feeling its weight. It was heavier than it looked, and there was no obvious way to open it. "Did she say what's in it?" "Evidence of Pacific Airways cover-up," she said. "Proof that they knew about safety problems and ignored them." David's voice cracked. "Maya, I loved my brother, and I wanted justice for him, but not like this. Not with innocent people dying." Maya felt a flicker of hope. If Elena's revenge plot depended on this evidence surviving the crash, maybe they could use it as leverage. "David, I need you to help us. Can you talk to your sister? Convince her to tell us what antidote the pilots need." "She won't listen to me. She thinks I'm weak, that I don't understand the bigger picture." David shook his head. "But Maya, maybe we can use what she doesn't know I know." "What do you mean?" "She thinks I'm just carrying evidence for her. She doesn't know I listened to one of her phone calls. Maya, the poison she used, it's not just affecting the pilots. In high doses, it's fatal, but she has the antidote with her." Maya's heart leaped. She has the antidote? Hidden somewhere on her person. A small injector, like an EpiPen. She told someone on the phone that she'd keep it as insurance, in case she changed her mind about dying in the crash. Maya looked back toward where Elena was restrained, her mind racing. The woman had the cure for the pilot's condition, but getting it would require a confrontation at 40,000 feet with a trained terrorist who had nothing left to lose. "James," Maya said urgently, "get back to the cockpit and tell Marcus. We need 15 more minutes. Tell Frank to inform Seattle Tower we're coming in, whether they're ready or not." She looked at David, seeing her brother-in-law's desperate determination reflected in his eyes. "David, I need you to help me get that antidote. It's going to be dangerous." "I'll do whatever it takes," David replied immediately. "I won't let Elena hurt these people because of our family's pain." Maya nodded, then made her way back toward Elena's seat, knowing she was about to face the most dangerous conversation of her life. Outside the windows, the storm was getting worse, and time was running out for everyone on board. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Maya felt like they might actually have a chance. Maya approached Elena's seat with David close behind her, trying to project calm confidence while her heart hammered against her ribs. Elena looked up at them with that same cold smile, but Maya noticed her eyes flick to David with something that might have been surprising. "Well, this is touching," Elena said in her accented English. Brother and sister reunited in their final moments. "Elena, enough," David said, his voice stronger than Maya had expected. These people don't deserve to die for what Pacific Airways did to Marco, don't they? Elena's expression hardened. 37 people died in Marco's crash. 37 innocent people, just like these. Why should they matter more? Maya kept her voice level and professional. Because you have the power to save them. David told me about the antidote. Elena's eyes flashed with anger, but Maya caught something else, a flicker of uncertainty. My dear brother has always been too trusting, too weak, too human, David corrected. Elena, Marco wouldn't want this. He was a good man who made a mistake. He wouldn't want innocent people to pay for his guilt. Marco killed himself because he couldn't live with the shame. Elena snapped, her composure finally cracking. Pacific Airways destroyed him, destroyed our family, and then covered it up. Maya saw her opening. Then help us expose them the right way. Help us land this plane safely, and your evidence will get the attention it deserves. If we crash, it just becomes another tragedy. No one will look deeper. Elena studied Maya's face intently. You're very clever, Miss Chen, but you don't understand, this isn't just about revenge anymore. I've committed too many crimes already. Even if we land safely, I'll spend the rest of my life in prison. But David won't, Maya pointed out. And neither will the 235 other people on this plane. The aircraft shuddered through another patch of severe turbulence, and Maya heard Marcus's voice over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Seattle. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position. Maya felt a chill. They were out of time for negotiation. Elena, she said urgently, the pilots are going to be unconscious in minutes. Our backup pilot is a flight instructor with no experience in commercial aircraft. The weather is terrible, and we're low on fuel. Even if you want to die today, don't you want it to mean something? Don't you want justice for Marco instead of just more senseless death? Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Maya could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked exactly like an EpiPen. 2 doses, Elena said, holding up the injector. Enough for both pilots, if you can get it to them in time. The effects should reverse within 10 minutes. Maya reached for the antidote, but Elena pulled it back. But first, I want your word that my evidence will be delivered to the media and to the authorities. That Pacific Airways will finally be held accountable for what they did. You have it, Maya said without hesitation. David nodded his agreement. Elena handed over the injector. The red button activates each dose. Press it against the neck like a real EpiPen. But Maya, even with the pilots recovered, landing in this storm is going to be extremely dangerous. Maya was already running toward the cockpit, the precious antidote clutched in her hand. She burst through the door to find Marcus hunched over the controls, sweat pouring down his face as he tried to follow Captain Rodriguez's increasingly weak instructions. How long until we have to land? Maya asked breathlessly. 20 minutes, maybe less, Frank reported from the radio. Seattle Tower is clearing the airspace, but they're warning us about severe wind shear and low visibility. Dr. Harrison looked up as Maya showed him the injector. Thank God, who do we treat first? The captain, Maya decided. He has more experience and might be able to guide us through the landing. Dr. Harrison took the injector and pressed it against Captain Rodriguez's neck. The red button clicked, and they could see the medication entering his system. Then he quickly administered the second dose to First Officer Kim. How long until it takes effect? Maya asked. Elena said for 10 minutes. But Maya, Dr. Harrison's voice was grim. Even with the antidote, they've been unconscious for a while. There might be cognitive effects, delayed reactions. They won't be at full capacity. Through the cockpit windows, Maya could see the lights of Seattle approaching through the storm clouds. The city looked impossibly small and distant, and the Aircraft was bucking and rolling in the turbulent air like a ship in a hurricane. "Marcus, how are you feeling about the approach?" Maya asked. Marcus looked up from the instruments, his face pale but determined. "I've got the basic procedures down, thanks to Captain Rodriguez. But Maya, the automated systems are designed to help experienced pilots, not replace them completely. I'll need to make judgment calls I'm not qualified to make." Captain Rodriguez suddenly stirred, his eyes focusing with more clarity than they'd shown since the poisoning began. "Maya, what's our status?" 15 minutes out from Seattle, storm conditions. You and First Officer Kim were poisoned, but we've administered the antidote. How do you feel?" Captain Rodriguez tried to sit up straighter, his hands moving toward the controls with muscle memory. "Dizzy, disoriented, but I'm improving." He looked at Marcus. "You're the flight instructor?" "Yes, sir." "Marcus Webb. I've been trying to follow your instructions, but—" "You've done well," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice getting stronger. "But I'll take it from here. Can you help me check the instruments?" First Officer Kim was also beginning to stir, though he seemed more disoriented than the captain. Frank looked up from the radio. "Seattle Tower is asking for our final approach confirmation. They need to know if we're coming in on runway 16 right." Captain Rodriguez was rapidly scanning the instruments, his professional training overriding the lingering effects of the poison. "Fuel status? Critical," Marcus reported. "Maybe 10 minutes of flight time remaining. Weather conditions? Wind. Shear warnings, visibility less than a mile, gusting crosswinds." Captain Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, then made his decision. "We're committing to Seattle, runway 16 right. Tell the tower we'll need emergency services standing by, and we want the runway foamed." Maya felt a mixture of relief and terror. The pilots were recovering, but they were still attempting one of the most dangerous landings possible, under the worst conditions imaginable. "Maya," Captain Rodriguez said, turning to her, "I need you to prepare the cabin for emergency landing. Crash positions, review evacuation procedures." And Maya luckily met her eyes. "Thank you, you saved all our lives today." Maya nodded, then headed back into the cabin to prepare the passengers for what could still be a catastrophic landing. As she walked down the aisle, she saw Elena watching her with an expression that might have been respectful. "Maya," Elena called out softly as she passed. "For what it's worth, I hope you make it." Maya stopped and looked at the woman who had nearly killed them all. "Elena, we all make mistakes. It's what we do afterward that defines us." Then she picked up the intercom to address the passengers, knowing that the next 15 minutes would determine whether her words had been wisdom or merely wishful thinking. Maya's voice came over the intercom with practiced calm, though her hands trembled as she held the handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant. We will be landing in Seattle in approximately 10 minutes. The weather conditions are challenging, so we will be performing an emergency landing procedure." She could see the passengers' faces tense with fresh fear, but she continued steadily. "Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened tightly. Remove any sharp objects from your pockets, and review the emergency information card in your seat pocket. Flight attendants will now demonstrate the brace position." James and the other crew members moved through the cabin, showing passengers how to position themselves for impact while Maya continued her announcement. "In the unlikely event of an evacuation, remain calm and follow crew instructions. Do not attempt to retrieve personal belongings." Through the windows, the lights of Seattle were getting larger, though they flickered and wavered through the storm. Maya could hear the engines changing pitch as Captain Rodriguez adjusted their approach down in the cockpit. Both pilots were working with increasing clarity as the antidote took full effect. First Officer Kim was running through pre-landing checklists, while Captain Rodriguez fought the turbulence to maintain their approach path. "Flaps to 30, Captain Rodriguez commanded. "Flaps 30, green light," Kim confirmed. Seattle Tower, Pacific 847 on final approach. Runway in sight. Pacific 847, Seattle Tower. Wind to 00 at 35, gusting to 45. Runway 16 right, cleared to land. Emergency services are standing by. Maya returned to the cockpit to watch the final approach. Through the windscreen, she could see the runway lights cutting through the rain and darkness, looking impossibly narrow and distant. "Maya," Captain Rodriguez said, without taking his eyes off the instruments, "I need you to know, even with both pilots conscious, this is going to be rough. The crosswinds are at the edge of what this aircraft can handle, and we're coming in heavy with barely enough fuel for one attempt." "What are odds?" Maya asked. "Better than they were an hour ago," Captain Rodriguez replied grimly. "But I won't lie to you, this is going to take everything I've got." The plane suddenly dropped sharply as they hit a downdraft, causing several passengers to scream. Captain Rodriguez fought the controls, his knuckles white as he worked to regain the approach path. 200 feet, First Officer Kim called out. Reading the altimeter, Maya could see the runway clearly now, wet and gleaming with foam that the emergency crews had sprayed in preparation for their arrival. Fire trucks and ambulances lined both sides of the tarmac, their lights flashing through the storm. 150 feet. Airspeed is stable. The aircraft was bucking and rolling in the crosswinds, and Maya could see Captain Rodriguez making constant corrections to keep them aligned with the runway centerline. 100 feet. Through the cabin windows, Maya could see they were passing over the airport perimeter. The passengers were in brace positions, many of them praying or crying. Silently, 50 feet. The wind suddenly shifted, pushing the aircraft hard to the left. Captain Rodriguez applied the right rudder and banked slightly, fighting to keep them on the runway heading. 25 feet. Maya held her breath. They were seconds away from touchdown, but the plane was still being buffeted by the storm winds. 15 feet. 10 feet. The main landing gear touched down with a tremendous thud that shook the entire aircraft. But they were down too hard and slightly off-center, causing the plane to bounce back into the air. "Going around," Captain Rodriguez shouted, applying power to the engine's dot. But First Officer Kim checked the fuel gauges and shook his head. "Negative. We don't have enough fuel for a go-around." Captain Rodriguez immediately cut the power and tried to get the aircraft back on the ground. The second touchdown was even harder, but this time the wheels stayed in contact with the runway. However, they were moving too fast and the wet runway wasn't providing enough friction for normal braking. "Maximum reverse thrust," Captain Rodriguez commanded. The engines roared as they reversed direction, trying to slow the aircraft. Through the windscreen, Maya could see the end of the runway approaching rapidly. They were running out of space. "Deploy spoilers. Maximum brakes." First Officer Kim activated every system designed to slow them down, but Maya could see they were still moving too fast. The runway end was getting closer and closer. "Brace for impact," Captain Rodriguez shouted over the intercom. Maya gripped the cockpit doorframe as the aircraft left the end of the runway, bounced across a grass safety area, and slammed into the approach lights of the perpendicular runway. The impact threw everyone forward violently, and Maya heard the sickening sound of metal tearing and glass breaking. But then, miraculously, they stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence except for the sound of rain on the broken windscreen and the distant wail of approaching sirens. "Is everyone okay?" Captain Rodriguez asked, his voice shaky but professional. Maya looked around the cockpit. Both pilots were conscious and alert. First Officer Kim was checking instruments with practiced efficiency. Frank was already reaching for the radio to report their status. "We're alive," Maya said, almost not believing it. She rushed into the cabin to check on the passengers. There were some injuries, cuts from broken plastic, a few possible fractures from the hard landing, but everyone was conscious and moving. The emergency exits were already being opened by well-trained passengers, and the evacuation slides were deploying. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya announced, "we have landed safely. Please evacuate the aircraft calmly using the emergency slides. Do not retrieve personal belongings." As passengers began sliding down the emergency chutes into the arms of waiting rescue workers, Maya saw Elena still in her seat, making no move to evacuate. "Elena, you need to get off the plane," Maya said. Elena looked up with a sad smile. "Where am I going to go, Maya? FBI agents are probably already surrounding the aircraft." "That's not my problem anymore," Maya replied. "But you kept your word. About the antidote, maybe that will count for something." Elena nodded slowly, then stood and walked toward the emergency exit. "Maya," she said as she reached the slide, "for what it's worth, you're a remarkable woman. You saved everyone today." Then she was gone, sliding down into the custody of federal agents who were waiting below. Maya was one of the last people off the aircraft, helping an elderly passenger who was having trouble with the evacuation slide. As her feet touched the wet tarmac of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, she looked back at the damaged but intact aircraft and realized they had actually done it. 237 people had boarded Pacific Airways Flight 847 that morning. 237 people were walking away from it alive. Maya Chen, who had started the day as just a flight attendant, had somehow become the person who saved them all. 3 hours later, Maya sat in an airport conference room, still wearing her torn and coffee-stained uniform, facing a panel of FBI agents, airline executives, and federal aviation officials. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving her exhausted but oddly calm. "Ms. Chen," Agent Sarah Thompson said, consulting her notes, "let's go through the sequence of events one more time. You first became aware of a problem when the pilots failed to respond to your call?" Maya nodded, recounting the story she'd already told twice. The officials listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. Through the conference room windows, she could see the damaged aircraft being examined by investigators, its emergency slides still deployed like yellow tongues in the airport lights. The passenger manifest indicated that David Kovač was Elena's brother, asked Janet Morrison, Pacific Airways head of security. "That's correct. He was as much a victim as anyone else. Elena lied to him about her intentions." Agent Thompson made another note. "And the evidence Elena mentioned. Have you examined the contents of the cylinder David gave you?" Maya shook her head. "I gave it to you immediately after the evacuation. I figured that was above my pay grade." A slight smile crossed Agent Thompson's face. "Miss Chen, after today, I think your pay grade has increased significantly." There was a knock on the door, and Captain Rodriguez entered, looking tired but much better than he had at 40,000 feet. His color had returned to normal, and his eyes were clear. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, "but I wanted to speak with Maya before the debriefing ends." "Of course, Captain," Agent Thompson replied. "We're nearly finished here anyway." Captain Rodriguez sat down across from Maya, his expression serious. "Maya, I've been flying for 23 years. I've handled emergencies, mechanical failures, severe weather, medical crises. But what you did today, ... He shook his head in amazement. "You took command of a situation that would have challenged the most experienced crew, and you made decisions that saved every life on that aircraft." "I just did what needed to be done," Maya replied, uncomfortable with the praise. "No, Captain," Rodriguez said firmly, "you did far more than that. You showed courage, intelligence, and leadership under pressure that I've rarely seen. The way you handled Elena, convinced her brother to help, organized our makeshift crew." He paused. "Maya, Pacific Airways would be honored to fast-track you into our pilot training program if you're interested." Maya blinked in surprise. Pilot training? Janet Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Chen, what Captain Rodriguez is saying is that the company recognizes exceptional talent when we see it. Your actions today saved not just lives, but probably the airline's reputation as well. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our pilot training academy, with guaranteed employment upon completion. Maya sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. That morning, she'd been a flight attendant looking forward to a routine flight to Seattle. Now she was being offered the chance to become a pilot herself. I need some time to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Morrison replied. But Maya, don't underestimate what you've accomplished. Not many people could have done what you did today. Agent Thompson closed her notebook. Ms. Chen, we'll need you available for follow-up interviews as we investigate Elena's activities and any potential accomplices. But for now, you're free to go. There's a hotel room reserved for you, and transportation will be provided back to Sacramento tomorrow if you prefer. As the meeting broke up, Maya found herself standing alone in the corridor, still processing everything that had happened. Through a window, she could see passengers from her flight being reunited with family members in the terminal. Some were crying, others laughing with relief. All of them were alive because of decisions she'd made. In the most terrifying hours of her life, Dr. Harrison appeared beside her, his medical bag in hand. How are you holding up, Maya? I'm not sure yet, she admitted. It all feels surreal. That's normal after a traumatic event, he said gently. But Maya, I want you to know what you did in that cockpit, the way you kept everyone calm and focused. That wasn't just professional training. That was exceptional leadership under pressure. Maya looked at him curiously. Dr. Harrison, can I ask what kind of medicine you practice? He smiled. Emergency medicine. 20 years in trauma centers and emergency rooms. I've seen people face life and death situations before, and most of them don't respond the way you did. You have a gift for crisis management. I was terrified the entire time, Maya confessed. Good leaders usually are, Dr. Harrison replied. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear. Marcus Webb approached them, looking much more relaxed than he had in the cockpit. Maya, I wanted to thank you before I head home. You gave me the confidence to do something I never thought I could do. You're the one who learned to fly a 737 in an hour, Maya pointed out. Only because you made me believe it was possible, Marcus replied. You turned a group of terrified strangers into a functioning crew. That's not something they teach in flight school. As Marcus walked away, Maya reflected on the events of the day. She'd started as a flight attendant, but somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, she'd become something more. She'd become a leader. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. Saw the news. Are you okay? Call when you can. Maya realized that news of their emergency landing was probably already spreading across the country. She'd have to call her family, her friends, everyone who would be worried about her. But first, she wanted a few more minutes to process what had happened. She walked to the window overlooking the tarmac, where Flight 847 sat damaged but intact under the investigation lights. Tomorrow there will be interviews, reports, and probably media attention. Elena would face trial for terrorism charges. David would have to deal with the aftermath of his sister's actions. Pacific Airways would implement new security measures. But tonight, Maya just wanted to appreciate the simple fact that everyone had survived. 237 people were going home to their families because she'd refused to give up. James appeared beside her, also looking out at the aircraft. Hard to believe we all walked away from that, he said. Hard to believe a lot of things about today, Maya replied. So, are you going to take them up on the pilot training offer? Maya considered the question. A few hours ago, the idea would have seemed impossible. But then again, a few hours ago, she would have said it was impossible for a flight attendant to land A commercial aircraft in a storm with the help of an amateur pilot and a few brave passengers. "Maybe," she said finally. "I think I'm ready for a new challenge." James smiled. "After today, I think you can handle anything." Maya nodded, still looking out at the lights of the airport. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of another aircraft taking off, carrying its own load of passengers to their destinations. The world of aviation would continue, made slightly safer by the lessons learned from Flight 847. Maya Chen, who had been just a flight attendant that morning, was now someone who knew that extraordinary circumstances could reveal extraordinary capabilities in ordinary people. She was ready to find out what else she could do. Maya adjusted her new captain's hat and looked at herself in the mirror of the Pacific Airways training facility. The uniform felt different, now not just the clothes of someone who served passengers, but the attire of someone responsible for their safety in the most fundamental way. "Ready for your final check ride?" asked Captain Rodriguez, who had become her mentor and training supervisor. "As ready as I'll ever be," Maya replied, though she felt confident rather than nervous. The past 6 months of intensive training had been challenging, but after what she'd experienced on Flight 847, normal flight training scenarios seemed manageable. "You know," Captain Rodriguez said as they walked toward the simulator building, "I've been teaching new pilots for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone adapt to aircraft systems as quickly as you have. It's like you already understand what it means to be responsible for people's lives." Maya smiled. "I had a very intense introduction to that concept." The local news crew was waiting outside the training facility, having gotten wind of Maya's graduation. She'd tried to avoid media attention, but the story of the flight attendant who saved Flight 847 had captured public imagination. "Miss Chen," called out reporter Lisa Kim, "how does it feel to be graduating from flight school just 6 months after your heroic actions on Flight 847? "It feels like the natural next step," Maya replied diplomatically. "That experience taught me that I have a passion for aviation safety and crisis management. Becoming a pilot lets me use those skills more effectively." "What would you say to young people who might be inspired by your story?" Maya paused thoughtfully. "I'd say that you never know what you're capable of until circumstances demand it. Don't be afraid to step up when people need you, and don't assume that your current role defines your potential." After the brief interview, Maya and Captain Rodriguez entered the flight training center, where she would complete her final check ride in a 737 simulator. As they walked through the halls, Maya noticed a framed newspaper article on the wall. "Flight attendant saves 237 lives in dramatic emergency landing. Strange seeing yourself on the wall?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "A little," Maya admitted. "But mostly it reminds me why I'm doing this." They entered the simulator room, where First Officer Kim was waiting. He'd recovered completely from the poisoning and had specifically requested to be Maya's check pilot for her final evaluation. "Ready to show us what you've learned?" Kim asked with a smile. Maya settled into the captain's seat of the simulator, her hands moving automatically to the familiar controls. The cockpit looked exactly like the one she'd seen during the most terrifying hours of her life, but now it felt like home rather than a puzzle to be solved. "Pacific Airways 847, you are cleared for takeoff," came the simulated air traffic control voice. Maya pushed the throttles forward, feeling the simulated aircraft accelerate down the runway. As they climbed into the virtual sky, she thought about the real Flight 847 and how much had changed since that day. Elena Kovač had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for terrorism charges, but her evidence had led to a real investigation of Pacific Airways safety practices. Several executives had been fired, new safety protocols implemented, and the families of Flight 447 had finally received acknowledgement and compensation for their losses. David Kovač, had testified against his sister, but had also worked with authorities to ensure that the legitimate safety concerns Elena had raised were addressed. He'd started a foundation focused on aviation safety advocacy, working to prevent the kind of cover-ups that had driven his family to such desperate measures. Marcus Webb had returned to his flight instruction job, but with new confidence and several offers from commercial airlines. Dr. Harrison had been commended by the FAA for his medical assistance during the crisis. Frank Rodriguez had become a consultant on aviation, emergency communications, and Maya had discovered that her calling wasn't just to serve passengers, but to command the aircraft that carried them safely to their destinations. The check ride proceeded smoothly through various emergency scenarios: engine failures, severe weather, navigation system malfunctions. Each challenge felt manageable compared to what she'd faced in real life. Emergency Scenario 7. First Officer Kim announced, both pilots incapacitated by food poisoning. Flight attendants must take control with assistance from passengers. With limited flight experience, Maya couldn't help but laugh. Really? That's the scenario you're giving me? Just checking to see if you remember the basics, Kim replied with a grin. Maya flew the simulated emergency perfectly, drawing on both her training and her real-world experience. When they landed the simulator safely, both Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Kim were nodding with approval. "Congratulations, Captain Chen," Captain Rodriguez said formally. "You've successfully completed your certification requirements. Pacific Airways is proud to welcome you as our newest pilot." Maya felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. 6 months ago, she'd been a flight attendant who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Now she was a qualified commercial pilot, ready to take responsibility for the safety of passengers and crew. As they left the simulator, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from James, who was working a flight to Denver. Saw the news crew outside the training center. "Congratulations, Captain. The passengers on your first flight are lucky to have you." Maya smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Try not to poison any pilots while I'm learning to be one." "Too soon?" came his immediate reply, followed by a laughing emoji. Maya walked out of the training facility into the Seattle sunshine, where a small crowd of Pacific Airways employees had gathered to congratulate her. Among them was David Kovač, who had flown up from Sacramento for her graduation. "Maya," he said, approaching with a nervous smile, "I wanted to be here for this. After everything that happened. Well, I wanted to see something good come from all that tragedy." "How are you doing, David?" Maya asked. "Better. The foundation work has been meaningful, and I think Marco would be proud that his death led to real safety improvements."